Blaine Prescott's hand clamped across Lena Ortiz's throat and drove her backward into the stainless steel wall outside Trauma Bay 3, hard enough that the impact rang down the corridor like a dropped tray. Her heels skated on tile. Her airway narrowed to a thin, burning straw. The fluorescent lights above her strobed in her vision. Bright white, bright white, bright white, each pulse sharper than the last. Blaine's thumb ground under her jaw while his fingers dug into the side of her neck, and when she tried to wedge 2 fingers between his wrist and her skin, he shifted his weight and lifted, just enough to make her toes scrape for purchase. Her ID badge snapped against the wall. A lanyard bead cracked. She tasted metal before she understood she was bleeding. "Talk now," he said, smiling like this was private entertainment. "Or don't talk again." Lena got 1 breath, half a breath, then none. His other hand ripped her phone from her scrub pocket and smashed it against the wall beside her face. The sound was small and violent at once, glass and plastic and battery parts scattering across gray tile. He did it again, twice, quick wrist snaps, until the screen burst into a spiderweb and the frame bent inward. On the second hit, the heavy ring on his index finger clipped her mouth. Her lips split. Warm blood tracked down the corner of her chin and under the collar of her navy scrub top. The corridor smelled like disinfectant, burned coffee from the nurse's station, and the faint electrical bite of overworked hospital vents. At 3:07 a.m., those smells always meant routine fatigue, routine grief, routine waiting. Tonight, they mixed with something else, a sour, expensive cologne and the gasoline tang clinging to Blaine's leather jacket, faint but real. The scent she had noticed 2 nights ago in the parking lot, when Sam's truck became a fireball and everyone called it vandalism. Lena drove her knee up. He blocked with his thigh. She struck his forearm with the edge of her hand, once, twice, a medic's precise motion aimed at the radial nerve, but Blaine had 40 pounds on her and the confidence of a man who had never been punished. He slammed her wrist to the steel and leaned closer, his sunglasses still perched on his head, though it was the middle of the night and there was no sun anywhere in this building. "You're going to forget what you saw," he said. "You're going to forget my face. You're going to forget the truck." His grip tightened. At the edge of her blurring vision, a tan and black shape lunged low and fast, claws scraping tile. Ghost's growl rolled up from deep in his chest, not loud yet, not full, a warning tuned to bone. The German shepherd hit the end of his leash arc and twisted, trying to angle past Blaine's legs without taking Lena down with them. Blaine glanced down, annoyed, and kicked. The toe of his designer boot slammed into Ghost's left side with a hard thud that echoed off metal doors. Ghost staggered half a step. He did not yelp. He reset his stance instantly, weight over his front paws, ears pinned forward, eyes fixed on the hand crushing Lena's throat. Smoke scars still pulled tight along one flank where fur had grown back patchy and dark after the truck fire. Under these lights, his coat looked less gold than iron, a shadow with teeth. Lena saw the kick, saw Ghost absorb it, saw the old injury in his left hip flicker through his movement like a trapped spark from Kandahar that never fully left him. Fury cut through her oxygen panic for 1 clean second. Then Blaine shoved her head against steel again, and a white sparks burst behind her eyes. He laughed, breath hot with mint and something sour. "You don't get to make me nervous." 17 people watched from less than 30 feet away. 2 interns in wrinkled white coats stood frozen by the crash cart, clipboards pinned to their chests like shields, one whispering, "Someone should call," without finishing the sentence. A respiratory resident Lena knew by first name backed into the medication alcove and stared at the floor. One security guard, broad and healthy and fully capable of crossing 10 steps, crouched near the hand sanitizer station, and retied his bootlace that did not need tying, fingers moving slowly, carefully, as if knots were suddenly urgent. The night janitor, cart parked beside the vending machines, watched through the dark reflection in the glass, eyes flicking up and away each time Blaine's voice rose. A man in a business suit, sitting with his mother outside imaging, lifted his newspaper and hid behind it, page trembling at the edges. A volunteer in a pink cardigan gripped a rosary and mouthed prayers without sound. 4 more staff members stood near the double doors to ICU, badges catching light, feet planted, bodies tilted backward in that universal angle of people trying to become furniture. Nobody moved. Lena's lungs convulsed. Her pulse hammered in her ears so hard the corridor sounds went underwater. She tried to force out words through the pressure at her throat. Cam. Era. It came as a rasp more than speech. Blaine followed her eyes toward the ceiling dome camera and smirked. Those feeds disappear, he said. They always do. He dragged her forward and slammed her back again, measured and rhythmic now, as if teaching a lesson. Stainless steel boomed. Ghost's growl deepened, rolling thunder under fluorescent hum. The dog's paws tracked for angle, every muscle locked. He watched Blaine's wrist, not his face. Always the hand, always the threat point. A nurse from night shift took 1 step forward, then stopped when Blaine turned his head and said a single name. Prescott. He said it like a badge, like a court order, like all the outcomes had already been purchased. You know who my father is, he told the corridor. He wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. Chairman Prescott, this hospital runs because he says it runs. The nurse stepped back. Lena felt shame hit the room as physically as a cold draft. But shame still wasn't motion. 17 witnesses and a long, bright corridor of polished tile, and the only living thing pushing toward her was a dog with old burn scars and a limp that showed when weather changed. Her fingers found Blaine's sleeve, and she clawed for the seam, trying to peel him off by leverage instead of strength. He caught her wrist and pinned it above her head. The split in her lip widened against her teeth. Blood dotted the front of his jacket. He looked at the stain with mild irritation, then wiped it on her shoulder like she was a towel. Last chance, he said. Say you saw nothing. She forced air past crushed cartilage. I saw you. The smile left his face. He drove her sideways into the wall, forearm across her collarbone now, pressure climbing back toward her airway. Ghost surged again. The leash snapped tight with a sound like a rifle sling under load. The janitor flinched at that sound and finally looked straight at the scene, then immediately turned toward his mop bucket, as if a dirty floor had become a crisis. At 3:09 a.m., the trauma bay doors hissed open and shut behind them as orderlies moved a gurney through, eyes fixed ahead. The practiced tunnel vision of people surviving night shift by selecting what they could admit was happening. The patient on the gurney moaned. A monitor beeped in clean electronic intervals. Life and damage shared the same 10 feet of corridor and pretended not to touch. Blaine leaned close enough that Lena could see the pale crescent scar at his chin, where a childhood bike crash had once met expensive plastic surgery. You think anybody here picks you over me? He whispered. You think your word beats mine? A hard clack sounded from farther down the hall. Boot soles. Deliberate, unhurried. Blaine didn't hear it yet. Lena did. Ghost did first. The German shepherd's ears cut forward. His body went still, then heavier, as if gravity had chosen his side. The growl in his chest changed pitch, from warning to recognition. Lena watched the corridor mouth over Blaine's shoulder and saw movement there. digital camouflage breaking out of shadow, tall frame filling the width of the hall in Navy NWU Type 3, scar crossing the jawline like old lightning. Sam Morrison had not spoken. He had not touched anyone. He had simply arrived, and the geometry of the room shifted around him. Blaine kept his hand on Lena's throat 1 second longer, still smiling for an audience that had already started to look somewhere else. The security guard rose too fast and nearly stumbled. One intern lowered her chart and finally reached for her phone. The man with the newspaper folded it down. The janitor stopped pretending to mop a clean square of tile. 17 witnesses, and at last they were looking at the right thing. Then Sam stepped into the fluorescent spill at the mouth of the corridor, and Ghost stopped straining long enough to look at him. The change traveled faster than sound. Lena felt it through Blaine's grip before she heard a word, a slight slack in his fingers where certainty used to live. Sam did not hurry. He crossed 5 tiles and stopped just outside Ghost's leash arc, shoulders squared, hands low, jaw scar pale against tired skin. Navy NWU Type 3 camouflage broke the hospital's white and steel palette like a warning flag. He looked like work, not theater. He looked like consequence. Ghost's ears rotated forward, his body locked. A low growl built in his chest, measured and controlled, the kind of sound that did not ask permission. Blaine glanced over his shoulder, irritated at first, then calculating. Lena saw the sequence in his eyes as clearly as monitor numbers. Annoyance, dismissal, a quick check for social rank. He scanned Sam's uniform, the scar, the hands, the leash. He missed the important part. Men like Blaine were trained by comfort to read logos, not threat posture. "Walk away," Blaine said without releasing Lena. "Staff issue." Sam said nothing. Lena fought for a breath and got a thin one, enough to cough blood against her split lip. The copper taste filled her mouth. Her pulse thudded in her ears so hard she could feel each beat in her fingertips. She looked at Sam and saw no panic, no performance, only the stillness of someone running angles in real time. Blaine's planted foot, Lena's oxygen window, camera dome above Bay 3, the distance to the security desk, Ghost's line of approach if a wrist moved wrong. The security guard finally straightened to full height and hovered 3 paces behind Blaine, hands empty, radio still clipped and silent. One intern lifted her phone chest high, thumb shaking over the record button. The janitor rolled his cart backward to clear the corridor and kept both eyes on Blaine now. Small movements, late movements, but movement. Blaine felt that drift and clamped harder, reasserting ownership with pressure. Lena's vision pinched at the edges. He turned his head toward the watchers instead of the man in camouflage and smiled again. Thinner this time. "Everybody calm down," he said. "She's hysterical." Lena tried to answer and managed a hoarse sound that was not language. Ghost shifted left, claws clicking once on tile, then settled, waiting on the leash for instruction only one person in that hallway could give. The burn-scarred fur along his flank twitched with each breath. Under the fluorescent bulbs, his tan and black coat went dark as iron in shadow. Sam's right hand moved half an inch, enough to tighten on the leash. Not a pull, a signal. Blaine finally looked at him directly. "You deaf?" he said. "I said walk." Sam held his gaze and still did not speak. Silence stretched, but it was not empty. Lena heard details she had missed while fighting for air. A heart monitor chiming from behind trauma doors, the hum of vending machine compressors, the soft rattle of rosary beads in the volunteer's hand. Ghost's measured exhale through his nose. The corridor had become a range line where everyone waited for one motion to decide what came next. Blaine's confidence flickered when none of his usual shields activated. No deputy arrived at a sprint. No administrator shouted Sam down. No one laughed with him. The room had tilted and left him standing alone in the center of his own noise. He covered the crack by leaning closer to Lena. "Tell him," he hissed. "Tell him you slipped." Lena drew one ragged breath and forced out 2 words. "You burned." His fingers dug into her throat hard enough to make the intern gasp. Ghost surged half a step, checked by the leash, growl rising from warning into promise. Sam's voice came low and flat. The first words he gave the corridor. "Hand off." 2 words. Nothing wasted. Blaine blinked, surprised by the economy more than the command. "You know who I am?" Sam's stare did not move. "Yes." Lena watched Blaine search that face for leverage and find none. He tried another angle, raising his chin toward the brushed steel sign, above the hallway corner where his family name gleamed in hospital lighting. "Then you know how this works," he said. "You don't get between me and my hospital." The sentence landed dead. Sam took 1 step forward, not closing distance fully, just enough to make Blaine account for reach. Ghost matched him perfectly, shoulder at Sam's knee, eyes on the hand at Lena's throat. The pair moved like a single decision, split into 2 bodies. The security guard's radio crackled to life at last. "Code Gray, Corridor C, Trauma 3, a voice said, thin with adrenaline. Too late. Still logged. A pair of night shift orderlies stopped at the far doors with a gurney and did not pretend any more. One lifted his own phone and angled for a clear line to Blaine's face. Lena's airway, Sam's position, timestamp visible in frame. Evidence began to exist in triplicate. Blaine noticed and swore under his breath. He shifted his grip to turn Lena into a barrier, forearm crossing higher near her jawline. Sam's shoulders changed by degrees, weight settling onto the balls of his feet. Lena had seen combat veterans in panic before. This was the opposite of panic. This was method. Ghost's ears pinned forward so sharply the movement looked mechanical. His lips parted just enough to show white teeth. No barking, no frenzy, only controlled threat, calibrated to the pulse in Blaine's wrist. His chest vibrated with a low sound that seemed to come from the building itself. "Call your dog off," Blaine said. Sam answered without looking away. "Release her." Blaine laughed once, brittle. "Not happening." He said it to Sam, but he looked at the crowd, begging the old hierarchy to return. Nobody helped him this time. The volunteer with the rosary had started recording. The businessman had lowered his paper completely and was speaking into his phone, voice urgent, naming location and time. The respiratory resident who had looked at the floor now stood beside Lena's cart. Eyes wet and jaw set, ready to pull her clear, the second pressure came off her neck. 17 witnesses. At last, they looked like witnesses. Lena's lungs burned. Her fingertips tingled. She locked eyes with Sam because it was the only stable point in the room and saw him clock her fading coordination. The cyanotic flush under hospital light, the seconds narrowing. He gave one tiny nod she could not have explained if asked later. "Hold. He's about to overcommit. Hold." Blaine felt that silent exchange and tightened again out of spite. Ghost went very still. Sam's jaw flexed once, and for the first time there was heat under his calm, brief and lethal, a flicker of the man who had survived places where hesitation got people zipped into transfer cases. He looked at Blaine's hand, then at Lena's face, then back to Blaine's eyes. His next words were quiet enough that only the front half of the corridor heard them. "Last warning." The hallway drew a collective breath and held it. This is where you and I pause, with Lena on the edge of consciousness, Blaine still pretending his name can outrun evidence, and a veteran with a scar on his jaw deciding exactly how much force the law will require in the next 2 seconds. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from. If you believe veterans and service dogs should never be discarded after what they've survived, subscribe and stay to the end, because what happened in this corridor stripped a powerful family down to the studs. Freeze this image for one heartbeat longer. Glass from Lena's broken phone glittering near the baseboard, blood on the seam of Blaine's leather sleeve, Ghost's breath fogging faintly in overcooled hospital air, 3 separate phones recording from 3 separate angles. The clock above Trauma 3 reading 3:10 a.m., while every person in that wing realized there would be no quiet cleanup tonight. Even the ceiling camera dome, the one Blaine said always failed, reflected a red status light in its smoked cover. The intern closest to the wall whispered, "It's recording," to no one and everyone. Blaine heard her. His eyes snapped up to the camera, then sideways to the phones in the crowd, then back to Sam. For the first time all night, fear showed plain on his face. Not fear of being hit, fear of being archived. Men raised inside protected systems learned early that pain faded and paperwork lasted. He shifted his stance to block lines of sight and only made the choke look clearer for every lens. "Put those down," he shouted toward the witnesses. "Now!" Nobody obeyed. A nurse in purple scrubs stepped to Lena's left, hands raised and empty, voice shaking but audible. "You're occluding her airway," she said. "Let her breathe." Blaine barked at her to back up. She did not. The security guard moved to Sam's side, uncertain but present, one hand hovering near his belt. "Sir," he said to Blaine, tone trying for authority and finding very little, "you need to release her." Blaine stared at him in disbelief. "You work for us." The guard swallowed. "Not tonight." It was a small sentence, but Lena felt it land through the pressure at her neck like a crack opening in concrete. The corridor's moral geometry kept changing, one delayed spine at a time. A janitor who had spent 10 minutes pretending to read vending machine reflections now stood with his mop handle horizontal like a barrier pole, blocking the easiest exit route toward the service elevator. One of the orderlies quietly slid the crash cart closer in case Lena dropped. The volunteer with the rosary kept filming and prayed out loud, steady now, each bead clicking like a metronome. Ghost watched Blaine's thumb. Sam watched everything. No one in that hallway knew yet about the melted collar cam fragments waiting to be recovered. The accelerant traces that would map from leather cuff to fuel can. The procurement files someone had tried to burn out of existence with an old truck and a living dog inside. They did not know the scope. They knew enough. A woman was being choked under hospital lights. A rich man was naming ownership as defense. A veteran and his K9 were the only clear line between harm and aftermath. The clock clicked to 3:11. Blaine's phone buzzed in his pocket. A bright, expensive ringtone swallowed by corridor hum. He ignored it. It buzzed again. Whoever was calling expected immediate access. He did not dare take a hand off Lena to answer. Sam spoke without volume and made the whole hall lean in. "You're done." Blaine's jaw hardened. "You think you can touch me?" Sam did not answer the question. He answered the situation. He shifted 1 inch to his right, opening a lane for the nurse and closing Blaine's angle to the security guard. Ghost mirrored the pivot, head low, muzzle lined on wrist and forearm, no wasted motion. Trained bodies, shared reps, a decade of trust translating into geometry. Lena's knees threatened to fold. She kept her eyes on Sam and counted backward from 5 because counting kept panic from owning the whole mind. 5, 4, 3. Her throat burned raw. 2, 1. Blaine's grip adjusted again, fingers sliding on sweat and blood. Ghost's growl dropped half an octave. And the next word Sam said, The three that would redraw every line in that corridor waited at the edge of his mouth as the room held perfectly still. Sam held the command in his mouth and did not spend it. Lena hung in Blaine's grip, Ghost's growl rolling low, 17 witnesses pinned between fear and shame, and the second stretched until it thinned like wire. That was the hinge. That was where this started to make sense, because a woman does not risk her airway for a stranger unless history has already written the choice. So the corridor froze at 3:11 a.m., and the story pulled back to the beginning. Lena Ortiz was 29, 5'4", compact from years of lifting patients and supply crates, with a medic's hands that never fumbled under pressure and never shook where anyone could see. She had enlisted at 19 because college brochures did not pay rent, and because she believed skill should mean something in a world where titles usually did. In Hellman, she learned to cut clothing away from wounds in darkness, while rotor wash blasted sand into her face. At Fort Bliss, she learned that the loudest sound after deployment was usually silence in an apartment where no one waited up. She left the Army with 2 commendations, one torn rotator cuff that flared in damp weather, and the kind of sleep pattern that came in 90-minute fragments with every door latch sounding like a threat. The VA job in Ridgemont gave her structure again. Respiratory therapist, night shift, the corridor between trauma and ICU, breath by breath by breath. It also gave her a front row seat to what this town did to people who did not have family names on buildings. By the second week of October, she had stopped pretending the one-bedroom apartment was temporary. She and her nephew Mateo had made rituals out of shortage, the way some families made rituals out of abundance. She sealed the drafty window with clear tape and folded towels under the door to keep heat from leaking into the hall. She warmed his socks on the radiator in the bathroom when the bedroom vent blew cold. She labeled shelf bins in block letters so his school mornings ran clean even when she came home after sunrise with disinfectant still in her hair. Breakfast, homework, dog-eared library books, science fair. Mateo was 7 and missing his front tooth and convinced that every object needed a mission. He gave her stethoscope a superhero name and lined his toy dinosaurs along the windowsill to guard the city against winter. On nights when bills sat open on the table like accusations, Lena watched him color at the chipped counter and remembered why fatigue was not an excuse. Her sister Sophia had died fast from an undetected postpartum clot 18 months earlier. Lena had signed the guardianship paperwork, with her scrub sleeve still damp from a 12-hour shift, and never once considered another option. Irreplaceable was not sentiment in Lena's life. It was logistics. She was the only respiratory therapist on nights who could calibrate the old portable ventilator in Bay 2 without waiting for biomedical. She was the only person Mateo wanted reading from the worn dinosaur encyclopedia with the missing spine page. She was the only adult who knew he would eat eggs only if the pepper went on first and the salt second, and that loud sirens made him stand very still in doorways because loss had taught him to listen for what came next. At 6:40 every morning, she sent his teacher one line through the school app: running 5 minutes late, bus delay, forgot folder, all good. Because consistency was how children relearned safety. At 9:15 p.m., she left a sticky note on the fridge for her neighbor, Mrs. Klein, who watched Mateo during overnight shifts and accepted payment in cash and stubborn silence. She was tired in layers, but she showed up. The night Sam's truck burned, Lena had just clocked out and cut through employee parking with 2 grocery bags biting into her fingers. The lot smelled like freezing rain and diesel from the loading dock. She heard glass pop, then a liquid splash, then a muffled impact from inside the truck cab that did not sound mechanical. She turned and saw a man in a dark leather jacket leaning through the cracked rear window of a battered Ford F-25. Arm extended with a red plastic can tilted at a sharp angle. She caught details because medics survive by details. White designer sole with a gold heel tab, silver ring on index finger, the hitching motion in his left shoulder like an old baseball strain, expensive cologne trying and failing to bury gasoline. Then flame took. It moved with obscene speed along the seat seam and up the inside of the windshield. A shape slammed against the rear door from inside. Dog, large, trapped. Lena dropped both grocery bags and ran toward the truck without thinking about rank or consequence. Another figure came from the far side of the lot at a full sprint. Digital camouflage, broad shoulders, jaw scar catching security light. Sam hit the driver door with a pry bar that had been strapped in the bed. Once, twice, metal screaming, while Lena grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall cabinet and emptied powder through the broken glass until her hands went numb. The door gave. Smoke rolled out thick and black. Ghost came through low, disoriented, fur smoking along his flank, one rear paw dragging for 3 steps until Sam got both hands under his chest and lifted. The man with the fuel can was already retreating to a black SUV idling by the service ramp. He looked over his shoulder once, face lit by orange flare, and Lena saw him clearly enough to identify him later in any light. Blaine Prescott had smiled while his target burned. 3 days passed before a deputy took Lena's statement. He wrote possible vandalism on the form, did not ask for her full timeline, and never collected the charred grocery receipt that had fused to melted rubber near the truck's rear tire at exactly 2:47 a.m. The responding officer told Sam the parking lot camera had glitched. He told Lena she was overtired after night shift. When she insisted she could identify the arsonist, he clicked his pen, glanced at her badge, and said, "These things get messy when names are involved." The next morning, the incident log entry was amended from targeted ignition to probable random property crime. By Friday, 2 witnesses who had spoken in the lot said they weren't sure anymore. By Sunday, Lena understood what every working person in Ridgemont eventually learned. Facts had weight, but surnames had gravity. Blaine Prescott was 24 and wore wealth like armor he never removed. He had the same square jaw as the man on the hospital fundraising brochures, and the same habit of looking through people rather than at them. His father, Charles Prescott, chaired the hospital board, the development authority, and 3 nonprofits that existed mostly to engrave Prescott in brushed steel across public walls, and Prescott Cardiac Wing, Prescott Family Learning Atrium, Prescott Scholars Hall at Ridgemont Community College. The town called it philanthropy with a straight face. Contractors called it leverage. Deputies called it budget stability because Charles underwrote their tactical equipment through a foundation that held private dinners at the country club and never allowed local press. Blaine grew up inside that ecosystem like a fish inside water. Rules were for ordinary people and ordinary paperwork. By late autumn, his pattern was open enough that only fear made it invisible. He came through the VA corridors after midnight in $400 sunglasses and soft leather gloves, filming staff on his phone for private group chats, making ownership claims as if he were reading policy. He cornered interns, mocked veterans in wheelchairs, and spoke to security by first name because he had known some of them since high school football fundraisers his father sponsored. Complaints existed. They just never moved. Human Resources logged 3 reports and marked them insufficient corroboration. 2 nurses requested transfer to day shift. One respiratory resident resigned after Blaine followed her to the parking garage and laughed while she fumbled her keys. Each incident became an isolated misunderstanding in official language, and isolation was the trick. Systems failed people quietly, one redacted line at a time. When Sam filed a formal arson complaint with a private investigator attached to his statement, the sheriff's office reassigned the case to a deputy whose brother worked maintenance for Prescott Properties. The deputy photographed the truck, nodded at the burn pattern, and told Sam to let insurance handle it. He did not swab the door seam for accelerant. He did not collect the melted collar cam bracket from the rear seat frame. He did not request subpoena access to nearby traffic cameras that might have caught the SUV plate. Lena called the state tip line herself during a lunch break and gave a full account, date and time and clothing description, and direction of travel. The call was logged, then routed back to county intake, then marked closed pending new information, external contact, dismissive outcome, filed and buried. Sam kept building his own chain of custody because he had learned in Yemen that missing evidence was often a decision, not an accident. He bagged fragments from the truck bed in clean freezer bags from his kitchen and labeled them with block-letter times. He paid an independent lab in Cedar Falls to run hydrocarbon analysis on residue scraped from the rear door seam. He preserved Ghost's harness, still smelling of smoke and fuel, in a sealed storage tote in his garage. Lena documented every odd detail she could remember from the lot. The gold heel tab on Blaine's shoe, the ring strike pattern, the gasoline note under designer cologne, the way his jacket cuff had a small crescent tear near the wrist seam. Distinctive details became anchors when memory got challenged in rooms designed to make witnesses doubt themselves. At Thanksgiving, Charles Prescott stood at the hospital charity gala under a crystal chandelier and announced a new donation for community safety modernization. The sheriff shook his hand for photographers. The hospital's CEO thanked him for visionary leadership. Blaine drank bourbon beside an ice sculpture and told a pair of residents, loud enough for Lena to hear from the service corridor, "My father owns this hospital." He said it once, smiling, with the lazy confidence of someone who had never met resistance with teeth. Lena carried a tray of untouched canapes past him and kept her expression neutral because her nephew needed rent paid on the first. Sam stood at the back wall in NWU Type 3, ghosted heel in a tan and black saddleback coat that turned gold in sunlight and dark as iron in shadow, and watched Blaine speak as if cataloging a target package. 2 weeks later, Lena saw the same crescent tear on Blaine's leather cuff when he reached across the nurse's station for a pen he did not need. The seam had been repaired with black thread that did not match factory stitching. Loaded setup, not forgotten. She logged it in a pocket notebook she kept behind her badge reel, right beside the lab receipt number Sam had texted and the date the state line had closed her report without interview. She did not know yet about the procurement fraud files on the drive Sam had hidden, or the dead teammate who had entrusted them to him, or why burning the truck had been less about revenge than erasure. She knew enough to stay careful, enough to keep copies, enough to back up every clip to cloud storage after midnight when hospital bandwidth ran fastest. And now, in Corridor C outside Trauma Bay 3 at 3:11 a.m., Blaine's hand was still on her throat, Sam's command was still one breath away, and the full weight of who Lena was and who Blaine had been allowed to become pressed into the same narrow second where consequences finally had a witness list. Sam kept the command behind his teeth and tightened his grip on the leash until the nylon bit into old scar tissue across his palm. From Lena's angle, he looked carved from restraint. No shaking, no wasted movement, Just a broad-shouldered man in Navy NWU Type 3 standing under bad fluorescent lights with a jaw scar, pale as chalk, and eyes that had stopped expecting rescue from institutions years ago. Blaine saw uniform and height. Lena saw the small details that mattered more. Sam's left knee slightly unloaded to protect old damage, his breathing locked to 4-count cadence, his right hand half open so he could transition from leash to wrist control in one clean line if Blaine twitched wrong. Sam had learned that economy in places where hesitation got people zipped into transfer bags. He had entered the teams at 23 and spent the next decade becoming useful in rooms like this one, rooms where oxygen and seconds were the only currencies that counted. He had been 6 feet of endurance and discipline then, too. Dark brown hair clipped close, shoulders built by work instead of mirrors, knuckles already carrying the white seams of old breaks. Deployment after deployment taught him how to read space fast. Where exits sat, where cameras sat, who would freeze, who would fold, who would choose cruelty because they thought no one in range could stop them. He never talked about those years unless paperwork forced him. Service records showed dates and units. They did not show the cost. The cost had a name. Petty Officer First Class Nolan Reeve. In Yemen, on a failed extraction outside Al-Hudaita, Nolan had taken fragmentation to the chest when a route that was supposed to be clean turned into an ambush corridor. Sam had dragged him 200 meters through concrete dust and gun smoke, one arm under Nolan's vest handle, one hand trying to clamp pressure, where pressure no longer solved anything. Medevac came late. The bird lifted anyway. Nolan died en route with Sam's hand still locked around his wrist, because Sam refused to let go while the pulse slowed and stopped under his fingers. Sam carried the body back to staging, signed transfer documents with blood under his nails, and sat alone in a lit shipping container for 3 hours because silence after rotor wash felt like a physical blow. He came home with a commendation nobody in Ridgemont had ever asked to see, and a nervous system that never powered down. By February of the first year after retirement, Sam had stopped pretending sleep would return on its own. He woke every 90 minutes like a metronome set by trauma. Heart hammering, hand already moving toward a weapon that wasn't there. Ears searching the dark for sounds his apartment did not make. Refrigerators clicked, pipes knocked. He cataloged each noise, then stayed awake until dawn because once his body went on alert, it did not trust itself to stand down. Hypervigilance sounded clinical in VA notes. In practice, it meant checking door latches 4 times, parking nose out, memorizing faces at gas pumps, and never sitting with his back to an entrance. It also meant he noticed things other people wrote off as static. He noticed that deputies at the truck fire had photographed paint damage, but not burn flow. He noticed one officer angled his body to block a camera line while talking to Blaine. He noticed the sheriff's public statement used passive verbs. An incident occurred. A vehicle was damaged. Language built to erase intent. He noticed Lena's split-second flinch in the parking lot when she smelled gasoline, and understood she had seen more than she had said yet. Trauma had sharpened him into a man who trusted patterns over promises. Then came the disposition center call that should have been routine and became another war. Fort Saylor Military Working Dog Disposition Center sent him the first packet on Ghost with 3 stamped phrases in red. Trauma reactivity, burn complication, unfit for standard placement. Sam read it once and set it down, then read it again because bureaucratic language could turn a decorated dog into excess inventory in 6 words. Ghost's file listed service citations, veterinary interventions, and incident reports. The last report suggested euthanasia if no qualified handler took full liability. Sam drove to the center the next morning in uniform because some systems still respected cloth when they ignored people. The kennel smelled like disinfectant and old fear. 12 German shepherds lined the run, each one carrying some version of service in their joints and eyes. Ghost stood in the back corner of Run 7. Tan and black coat, dulled by healing skin, left hip stiff, ears pinned until Sam stopped outside the gate and said nothing at all. The dog did not approach. He watched. That was enough. The adoption process took 8 months and 23 signatures because institutions that moved quickly to discard moved slowly to release. A civilian liability officer told Sam, "You understand this animal is a risk profile." A base veterinarian tapped a form and said Ghost had unpredictable response cycles under stress. A contracting official suggested less complex placements, as if years of service could be filed by convenience tier. Sam answered each hurdle with paperwork and discipline, not volume. He submitted his retirement medicals, his handler compatibility training, his property inspection, his emergency containment plan. He paid for an independent behavioral assessment in Cedar Falls when the internal recommendation stalled for 6 weeks with no explanation. External contact. Outcome. Conditional approval pending review board. The review board met on a Thursday and denied him on technical grounds tied to yard fencing height. Sam replaced the fence within 48 hours, resubmitted photos with timestamp and surveyor verification, and requested appeal through the Regional Command Legal Office. Outcome: appeal granted, placement authorized, transfer executed at 14:30 on a rain-heavy Monday that smelled like wet asphalt and relief. He brought Ghost home in the passenger seat, windows cracked, one hand resting near the dog's harness, but never forcing contact. At the first red light, Ghost pressed his nose to the air vent and held it there like he was learning a new map by scent. At the second red light, he leaned 3 inches toward Sam and stayed. Trust did not arrive as affection. It arrived as distance surrendered in measured increments. In the months after, Sam learned Ghost's trigger inventory the same way he had learned threat matrices overseas. Methodically, without ego. Sudden metallic clatter spiked him. Tight, enclosed parking structures spiked him. Men laughing too loudly near open flame made every muscle in his body lock like wire. Sam built routines around those facts. Dawn walks before traffic. Controlled exposure drills with ear protection. Hand signals instead of loud verbal cues at home. They became a 2-man element built out of damaged parts and strict consistency. When the truck burned with Ghost inside, Sam had reached the lot in time to break one door and lose the rest forever. The fire took paint, upholstery, tools, and the cheap frame photo of Nolan tucked above the visor. It also scorched Sam's last illusion that local power would stop at corruption and avoid outright harm. He watched deputies write vandalism beside a burn pattern that screamed accelerant and understood the old battlefield lesson had simply changed uniforms. If you wanted truth documented, you documented it yourself. So he did. Evidence bags labeled in block letters. Independent lab receipts filed in a waterproof case. Call logs saved. Backup copies mirrored. He wore NWU Type 3 even off-duty because the uniform worked as psychological armor when sleep failed and memory ran hot. People in Ridgemont called it stubbornness. Sam called it continuity under stress. Now, at 3:11 a.m., he stood 10 feet from the man who had tried to erase evidence by setting fire to a truck with a living dog inside, and he felt no rush of rage, only the cold alignment of training, grief, and legal precision. His dead teammate had once told him on a rooftop in Yemen, Choose your force first, then choose your words. Sam had already chosen both. Ghost felt the decision travel down the leash before anyone else in the corridor understood what changed. The dog had served long enough to read microtension in a handler's wrist better than most people read full sentences. He shifted his weight over his front paws and held there, breath measured, muzzle angled at Blaine's hand where Lena's airway disappeared under fingers and privilege. To the crowd, he looked like threat waiting to happen. To Sam, he looked like a veteran waiting for assignment. Ghost's record, if anyone had bothered to read it in full, should have ended every argument in that hallway. 9 years old, German Shepherd, 5 deployments, 23 Americans pulled alive from compounds, culverts, and blast-shadowed rooms that would have buried them without him. The first deployment put him in Helmand at 20 months with a handler named Chief Marcus Hale, who taught him door work with rubber balls and praise before either of them learned what real breaches cost. The second sent him through Kandahar with an assault element that trusted his nose more than satellite overlays. The third and fourth rotated through joint operations where insurgents wired thresholds and hid pressure plates under prayer rugs because they understood exactly what panic did to tired men. The fifth left him in Yemen alongside a different handler after Hale rotated home with spinal damage. Ghost learned to live inside noise and still separate signal from chaos. He alerted on command wires hidden in cracked plaster. He found 2 Marines under collapsed cinder block after a mortar strike by scenting blood through lime dust and smoke. He tracked a missing interpreter across 6 kilometers of hardpan at dawn and held point until the extraction team moved in. He stood in rotor wash with sand tearing at his eyes and did not break posture. 23 saves was the official number. Unofficial counts were always higher because some lives never made paperwork, and some rescues belonged to luck people could not bear to call luck. The wound that changed his gait came during a compound breach outside Kandahar city. The team had stacked at a steel gate when an improvised device detonated off-axis, not where intel predicted. Fragmentation punched low across the entry lane. One piece tore through Ghost's left hip and lodged near muscle, where surgeons could remove metal, but not memory. He tried to keep moving anyway, rear leg dragging for 2 steps, before Hale forced him down and kept a hand on his neck until medevac lifted. The veterinary surgeon's note read, "Guarded prognosis for full return to duty." Ghost returned in 6 months with a slight hitch in cold weather and the same stubborn drive that had made him valuable in the first place. By the second week after his return, he alerted on an explosives cache in a school outbuilding and prevented a strike window from becoming a casualty list. Then Yemen took Hale out of the picture and gave Ghost a new handler. Then the truck fire in Ridgemont gave him burn trauma civilian life had no vocabulary for. Smoke inhalation scarred his airways. Heat curled fur tight along one flank, where his tan and black coat grew back uneven, gold in sunlight, dark as iron under fluorescent shadow. The disposition center marked him reactive. People who had never seen him work called him unstable. People who had served with him called him what he was, decorated, wounded, and still precise. Sam remembered the first week after adoption, when Ghost refused to sleep unless he could see Sam's boots from the crate. He remembered the third week when a trash truck backfired outside and Ghost went rigid, then looked to Sam instead of bolting, choosing trust over instinct by a margin so small most people would have missed it. He remembered the first time Ghost took food from Lena's hand in the hospital loading bay, after weeks of declining contact from anyone but Sam. He remembered the night Ghost woke from a nightmare and pressed his head against Sam's chest until both their breathing synced. No speeches, no miracles. Just two veterans teaching each other that home could be relearned. The arson should have ended that progress. It did not. Ghost survived smoke and heat, came out of a burning cab, and 3 days later alerted on the same gasoline note, clinging to a leather sleeve in a service hallway. He alerted again in an evidence room days later, rigid posture and low chest vibration aimed at Blaine's jacket, bagged behind glass. Investigators dismissed it as residual agitation until Sam requested a controlled blind scent lineup with state oversight. Outcome? Ghost made 2 clean, independent alerts on Blaine-associated items and ignored controls. Lab follow-up matched accelerant traces from the truck seam to residue on a seized fuel can, later recovered near a Prescott maintenance shed. Forgotten hero was an easy phrase. The truth was harder. Ghost was a living archive. He remembered hands, fuels, fear, and fire. He remembered work. He remembered who hurt him. In Corridor C, with Lena gasping and 17 witnesses finally choosing to look, Ghost held steady at Sam's knee and waited. Not for permission to attack, but for the exact command that aligned protection with law. Sam felt the dog's shoulder brush his leg, a brief grounded pressure, and gave the smallest nod. Then he drew breath to spend the 3 words he had been carrying since the second he entered the hall. Let her go. Sam's voice was low enough that people at the far end of Corridor C heard tone before words, but every person in that line of sight understood command when it landed. Blaine did not release Lena. He tightened out of reflex the way men did when control started slipping, and they mistook pressure for authority. Lena's vision narrowed again, the white corridor tunneling at the edges, and for 1 second she thought she might black out before the outcome finally arrived. Then she felt something she had not felt since the truck fire night in the parking lot. Since deputies wrote vandalism over flame, since every complaint disappeared behind a board member's surname. She felt sequence. She knew who stood where. She knew who had watched and who had looked away. She knew exactly what this hand on her throat meant in legal language and in human language, and she knew Sam knew it too. 17 people remained in that corridor. Nobody pretended not to see now. The intern nearest the crash cart held her phone with both hands, elbows tucked, recording steady despite tears on her lower lashes. The security guard, still breathing hard from his own delay, shifted his stance 3 inches wider and keyed his radio again, this time loud enough for dispatch and half the floor to hear. The night janitor kept the mop handle across the service elevator opening, not as theater, as blockade. The volunteer with the rosary stopped whispering prayers and started saying details into her camera like a witness statement. Time is 3:11. Leather jacket, hand at throat. Navy uniform present. Even the businessman in loafers stood now, paper tucked under his arm, speaking to someone on speaker who identified herself as County Emergency Communications and asked him to repeat location twice. Lena tried to inhale and got only a thread. Her trachea burned. Her fingertips tingled with oxygen debt. She kept her eyes on Sam because every other point in the hallway moved. Ghost did not move at all. His ears stayed pinned forward. His body stayed locked. The low sound in his chest rolled like distant thunder under tile and fluorescent hum. Not frantic, not loud, only unwavering. Burned fur along his flank rose and fell with measured breaths. The old Kandahar hitch in his left hip vanished under work posture, as if pain had no vote while a threat hand remained active. His muzzle aligned with Blaine's wrist, then corrected half an inch as Blaine's thumb shifted on Lena's neck. Precision at canine speed. Discipline with teeth behind it. Blaine looked from Sam to the phones to the red recording light in the camera dome and laughed once, short and brittle. "You don't give me orders," he said. "Not in my hospital." The sentence fell flat for the same reason his last one had. Ownership required consent from the room, and he no longer had it. Sam took one step. Nothing dramatic, no rush. Just one measured placement of boot on tile that narrowed the gap and changed every available angle. He stayed outside, striking distance but inside consequence. His shoulders remained level, hands low, leash controlled in his right hand with 2 wraps, and slack enough to avoid transmitting panic down the line. Lena remembered absurdly Sam kneeling beside Ghost in the VA loading bay months earlier, showing Mateo how to offer a closed fist for scent before contact. Let him decide, Sam had told the boy. Respect makes control cleaner. She held on to that memory, while Blaine's forearm ground into her collarbone, because clean control was exactly what was about to happen, and she needed to stay conscious for it. Release her, Sam said. 2 words this time. Still no excess. Blaine shifted Lena sideways, trying to put her body between himself and the man in camo. His ring scraped her jaw. Blood from her lip streaked across his knuckles. "Back off," he snapped. "You touch me, I bury you. My father sits this hospital board. My father funds county tactical. You're done before sunrise." Sam's face did not change. That was the part Blaine had never been trained to read. Not anger, not fear, not ego, just calibrated indifference to status threats. Men who grew up hearing no did not scare him. Men who named donors did not scare him. Institutional pressure did not scare him. He had carried Nolan Reeves' body through dust and static and signatures that did not bring anyone back. He had spent 8 months fighting a form system to keep a decorated dog alive. He had watched a truck burn with his partner inside, while uniformed officers measured paint. Blaine's name drop registered as noise and was sorted out. Lena saw the moment Blaine noticed that nothing in Sam's posture reacted to the Prescott line. It was brief, a flicker near his left eye, but it was there. Ghost caught it too. His chest vibration deepened. His front paws edged forward 1 controlled inch, then stopped at the leash limit without pulling. The dog did not bark. He did not lunge. He rose in threat profile exactly as trained, shoulder height lifting, neck lengthening, muzzle staying level with Blaine's forearm. Silent pressure, visible capability, a warning that did not need translation. "Call him off," Blaine said, and this time there was effort behind the command. "Hand off," Sam said. Lena's knees wobbled. The respiratory resident at her left saw it and moved closer, palms up, waiting for the opening to catch and pull. A nurse behind him slid the crash cart, another foot forward. The security guard took 2 steps right to clear Sam's line and keep bystanders out of Ghost's arc. Small, competent choices, finally arriving all at once after 10 minutes of paralysis. The corridor that had failed her was beginning to function like a system under pressure. Blaine heard movement behind him and turned his head half an inch to check, and that fraction was enough for Ghost's body to go from ready to primed. Sam felt the shift through the leash and gave the smallest downward pulse with his fingers. Hold. Ghost held. The clock above Trauma Bay 3 clicked to 3:12. Blaine's pocket buzzed again. Persistent. Insistent. The phone he could not reach without giving up throat control. He swore under his breath and tried to force Lena upright by her neck, using pain to stabilize his stance. Lena gasped and clawed at his sleeve seam. Black thread repair over a crescent tear. The same repair she had logged weeks earlier in her badge notebook. Distinctive detail, confirmed at arm's length. "You think this matters?" Blaine hissed at her, loud enough for cameras. "You think anybody in this building takes your side?" Lena got one ragged breath and pushed words through swelling tissue. "They do now." Blaine jerked her hard enough that her shoulder struck steel. The sound cracked down the corridor. Ghost's lips lifted another fraction. The intern flinched but did not lower her phone. Sam moved his left foot forward and inside, drawing a narrow diagonal that took away Blaine's clean retreat lane to the service elevator. The janitor understood instantly and shifted his mop handle 2 feet higher to reinforce the block. No speeches, just alignment. Blaine saw the geometry close and tried to reclaim momentum with volume. "Security!" he shouted, glaring at the guard. "Do your job!" The guard held his ground. "I am." Blaine stared at him, stunned. That one-line betrayal hit him harder than any strike could have in that moment because it told him the old script was gone. He was no longer directing extras. He was now the subject in everyone else's report. He looked back at Sam and found the same steady stare waiting. No adrenaline grin, no shouted warning, just eyes like winter glass and the precise calm of a man who had already measured legal thresholds, witness angles, and takedown options with a woman's airway clock running in real time. Blaine's chin lifted in false bravado. "You got no authority here." Sam's answer was quiet. "I have cause." Ghost rose another inch on his front legs, not jumping, simply loading power where Blaine could finally see all of it. For the first time all night, Blaine read the pair correctly. He saw that the dog was not a pet and not bluff. He saw the scar at Sam's jaw and understood it was not cosmetic. He saw the hands, the old fractures, the leash control, the complete absence of hesitation, and he understood what kind of man stands that still while someone is being strangled under camera lights. Not a man looking for a fight. A man ending one with minimum necessary force and full memory afterward. Blaine swallowed. Lena felt his grip loosen by degrees, not from mercy, from calculation. He was trying to decide whether release now might look voluntary on tape. He was too late for narrative control and just smart enough to know it. "Easy," Sam said. "One word. Command to everyone." Dog, witnesses, himself. Ghost froze at once, chest still rumbling, muzzle inches from Blaine's wrist. Blaine tried a final bluff anyway because men like him never surrendered clean. "You lay hands on me and this town burns you," he said. Sam's gaze did not blink. "Let go." Blaine's fingers opened. Lena dropped. The respiratory resident and nurse caught her under both arms before her knees hit tile. Air slammed into her lungs in a ragged, wet pull that felt like swallowing razors. She coughed hard, folded forward, and heard herself making raw animal sounds she would be embarrassed about later if later arrived. The nurse checked her pupils with a penlight while the resident palpated her neck and counted her breaths out loud so dispatch audio would capture the progression. "Respiration shallow 28. Stridor present. Visible contusion, anterior neck. Keep filming." Blaine stepped back 2 paces, hands up now, palms out in a performance of innocence that would have worked on another night. "See," he said, voice climbing. "She's fine. She fell. You all saw she fell." No one answered him. Sam did not look at Lena yet. He trusted the med team to stabilize airway for 10 seconds while he managed the active threat. He shifted his weight forward 1 controlled increment and raised his left hand to chest level, open palm toward Blaine. "Stop marker." Ghost mirrored with a forward lean that kept the same muzzle to wrist distance. Every movement synchronized, handler and K9 as one system. "On your knees," Sam said. Blaine stared, disbelief and fury crossing his face in fast alternating bands. "Do you know who you're talking to?" "Yes," Sam said. "Knees." Blaine's eyes cut to the corridor camera, then to the 3 phones, then to the security guard's body cam now blinking red because someone in dispatch had remotely activated emergency record. Archive from every angle. He understood then that whatever happened in the next 10 seconds would survive him. Survive his father. Survive whatever calls were already being made. He did not kneel. He lunged instead, a fast, sloppy grab for Sam's chest rig area, trying to create contact first so he could call it assault later. Ghost exploded upward without barking, 86 pounds of trained force rising in a clean vertical arc on Sam's leash cue, forepaws off the ground, muzzle stopping a breath from Blaine's reaching wrist. No bite, no contact, just controlled interception and a sound from his chest that turned every vertebra in Blaine's neck rigid. Blaine recoiled as if he had touched a live wire. And in that recoil, eyes wide, hand snapping back to his own body, he finally saw what everyone else had seen since Sam entered the hall. This was not a hallway argument, not a donor-son's tantrum, not a staff dispute that could be erased by morning. This was the exact second his family name stopped being a shield and became evidence. Blaine's hand snapped back from Ghost's muzzle, and Sam used the opening exactly once. He stepped in, trapped Blaine's reaching arm at the wrist and elbow, turned his shoulder line, and folded him to the tile with controlled force that looked almost quiet until Blaine's breath punched out in a grunt. The security guard dropped to a knee on the opposite side and got cuffs on the first try, hands shaking but competent now. Ghost stayed standing over the arc of Blaine's movement, chest vibrating, eyes fixed on the ring hand that had just left Lena's throat. No bite, no chaos, just a locked perimeter with teeth in reserve. "Do not move," Sam said. Blaine twisted anyway, cheek against tile, voice ragged with disbelief. "Get off me! My father runs this place." The guard cinched the second cuff and said, louder this time so every phone caught it, "You are detained for assault in progress pending law enforcement transfer." Lena sat on the floor against the wall while the nurse supported her shoulders, and the respiratory resident held humidified oxygen to her face. Each inhale scraped, high and narrow, but air was moving. She pointed at the glittering debris near the baseboard and forced words through swelling tissue. "Foam pieces. Bag them. Don't sweep." The intern with tears on her lashes nodded, grabbed an emesis bag, and started collecting fragments one by one. Cracked screen, bent frame, battery sliver, even the tiny bead from Lena's broken lanyard. The volunteer with the rosary kept recording and narrated each item as it dropped into plastic. The janitor, still holding the mop handle like a gate, said, "I saw him hit it 3 times, and for the first time all night his voice did not shake." At 3:19 a.m., county deputies arrived, and the first one through the doors was the same man who had called Sam's arson vandalism. He stopped when he saw 4 phones filming, hospital camera status lit red, a cuffed Blaine on the floor, and Ghost staring through him as if uniforms no longer mattered. "What happened here?" he asked, already cautious. The businessman and loafers answered before anyone else could. "Emergency call logged at 3:10. Strangulation in progress. I stayed online with county dispatch for 6 minutes." The intern raised her phone. "Continuous video from before release." The volunteer raised hers. "Second angle. Timestamp visible." The security guard touched his chest. "Body cam remote activated by dispatch. Full audio." Blaine rolled to a hip and barked at the deputy. "Take these cuffs off. Now." The deputy looked at him, then at Sam, then at the ring-shaped blood smear on Lena's scrubbed shoulder. "Stand by," he said, and didn't move toward the cuffs. That was the first layer giving way. Layer 2 failed 7 minutes later when a state investigator walked in, wearing a plain jacket and carrying a printed callback log from the tip line Lena had used weeks earlier. "Ortiz?" she said. Lena raised 2 fingers from the oxygen mask. "Your prior report was closed at county intake. It's reopened under state review, effective now. She held up the log so cameras caught the case number, then took possession of the bagged phone fragments, the blood swab from Blaine's ring, and a copy of the corridor footage, pushed to cloud from the intern's account, and mirrored to hospital legal in real time. Blaine started shouting over her. She never looked at him. The final layer broke when hospital IT arrived with the tablet and confirmed, in front of everyone, that Corridor C's camera feed had not dropped once between 2:58 and 3:22. No glitch, the technician said. No missing segment. The nurse who had stepped forward during the choke looked straight at Blaine and said, "You said those feeds disappear." He looked away. By 4:05 a.m., Charles Prescott came down the corridor in a wool coat over silk pajamas, flanked by 2 administrators and the hospital attorney. He did not look at Lena first. He looked at the cuffs on his son and said, "This is a misunderstanding. I'm board chairman. Remove restraints and bring this to my office." The state investigator turned, handed him a printed property tag, and said, "Your son's leather jacket is now evidence, item 14C in an attempted homicide and arson-linked intimidation case." She nodded toward the brushed steel wall sign. "And your position creates conflict. You'll want counsel before your board meets at dawn." Charles's face hardened. "Do you know who funds this facility?" Sam answered from where he stood beside Ghost, voice flat. "Not tonight." At 4:22 a.m., with a judge woken for an emergency warrant, investigators opened a Prescott maintenance shed behind the hospital loading dock. Ghost entered on a short line, ears forward, gait steady despite the old hip hitch when he pivoted in cold air. He ignored paint cans, solvent lockers, and diesel drums. He went rigid at a stack of contractor tarps, pawed once, and looked back to Sam. Under the third tarp sat 2 red fuel cans with partial lot numbers matching the convenience store footage Lena had forced County to pull in her original report request. Accelerant traces from the caps later matched residue from Sam's truck door seam and Blaine's jacket cuff. At 5:11 a.m., evidence techs logged the charred grocery receipt Sam had preserved in a freezer bag, the melted collar cam fragments recovered from the truck frame, Ghost's smoke-stiff harness from the sealed tote, and Sam's independent Cedar Falls lab report with chain of custody signatures intact. The deputy who had dismissed the fire as random stood 10 feet away while Internal Affairs collected his body mic and service tablet. By sunrise, Blaine was booked on attempted homicide, arson, witness intimidation, and evidence tampering. He said his father's name twice in processing. The booking sergeant wrote it down as an alias note and kept typing. 3 days later, in a hearing room that smelled like old coffee and copier heat, the hospital board met under the Prescott donor wall. Charles arrived with counsel and a prepared statement about civic legacy. Then the state investigator played corridor audio through wall speakers. The room heard Lena's broken breaths, Sam's command, Blaine's threat, and Charles's own remove restraints demand over an active felony scene. A second clip followed, Ghost alerting on the fuel cans under warrant video with timestamps. A third, IT certification of uninterrupted camera feed. The board treasurer removed her glasses, looked at Charles, and said, "Your name is now litigation risk." Motion to suspend contracts passed unanimously. Motion to request resignation passed with 1 abstention. Charles signed before lunch. By the first Monday in March, the criminal sentencing courtroom was full before doors opened. Lena testified with a faint line still visible along her lip and no tremor in her voice. The janitor testified that he had seen Blaine in the parking lot the fire night and had stayed silent because his daughter needed his insurance. He said that shame had cost him sleep for months. The intern testified and finished the sentence she had dropped in the corridor. Someone should call state, not county, she said, and this time she had. The security guard admitted he had retied a boot to avoid choosing, then said he chose too late and would live with that. The respiratory resident who had stared at the floor testified that he had seen the black thread cuff repair at the nurse's station weeks before and had told no one. "I won't miss it again," he said. The judge reviewed the evidence list by number, each Prescott reference now attached to an exhibit tag instead of a plaque. He imposed prison time, restitution, and a permanent no-contact order. He referred 2 county officers for criminal review tied to evidence suppression. He ordered seized funds from the fraud-linked contracts redirected to a veteran K-9 recovery unit at the VA to be named for Petty Officer Nolan Reeve. Outside the courthouse, wind cut sharp through late winter sun. Sam stood beside the rebuilt F-250, fresh paint dull under gray clouds, while Ghost leaned against his leg in harness and working collar. Lena walked down the steps with Mateo, who clutched a small service ribbon in both hands as if it might tear if he breathed wrong. "Can I?" Mateo asked. Sam crouched so the boy could reach. Ghost lowered his head, perfectly still, while Mateo tied the ribbon to the harness strap with careful, clumsy fingers. The knot came crooked. Lena moved to fix it, then stopped when she saw Ghost nudge the boy's wrist once, gentle, accepting it as it was. Mateo swallowed and whispered, "Thank you for staying." Ghost stepped forward and pressed his head into Sam's chest. Full weight, the same way he had after nightmares and thunder and corridor lights. Sam's scarred hand settled behind the dog's ears and stayed there. Lena stood beside them, one hand on Mateo's shoulder, breathing easy for the first time in months. If you ever wondered whether power answers to anything, this was your answer in plain view. It answered to evidence that survived, to witnesses who stopped looking away, and to one dog who lived through fire and remembered exactly where truth was buried.